One of the biggest criticisms of modern football is that it has become a closed shop. The Big Six, or maybe more accurately, the Rich Six, have had an almost unassailable stronghold upon the Premier League for more than 15 years. The same is true, to an even greater extent, throughout most of world football. Bayern Munich and PSG have long been virtually untouchable in the Bundesliga and in Ligue 1. Barcelona and Real Madrid squat like giant toads over the whole of Spanish football. And in the likes of Portugal and the Netherlands, the big three of Benfica, Sporting and Porto in Portugal, and Ajax, Feyenoord and PSV in the Netherlands, occupy the top three places in the Primera Liga and Eredivisie tables virtually every season. Every rule has some exceptions though, and this season, the Premier League has two. Manchester United and Tottenham, the second and sixth most successful clubs in English football, and the fourth and ninth richest football clubs in the entire world, with the fifth and 10th highest average attendances on the planet, find themselves 16th and 17th at the time of recording, just above the Premier League relegation zone, with only 21 wins this season between them. Only the three promoted clubs, Ipswich, Leicester and Southampton, who are now seemingly doomed to spectacular failure every season, are below them, and yet, one of the two will compete in the Champions League next season, as they are both Europa League finalists, set to lock horns in Bilbao on Wednesday evening. That got me thinking, or more accurately, that got my friend Sam thinking, who sent me a text suggesting that I make a video about this a few days ago. What are some of the worst seasons that so-called super clubs have ever had? To be clear, I am maintaining a very high bar for what constitutes a super club. So, right now, I would argue that there are, at most, 15 in world football, and that is based upon a multitude of factors, including history, but also current stature and economics. So, Sampdoria, for example, who are undoubtedly a big club, but were relegated to the third tier of Italian football for the first time this season, or Schalke, who are a gargantuan club, but were involved in a second tier relegation scrap of their own this season, wouldn't quite constitute super clubs, and therefore wouldn't be eligible. Who is, and isn't a super club, is also contextualised in terms of time. Man City, for example, are a bona fide super club now, but they weren't one when they got relegated to the third tier in the late 1990s, so that season wouldn't be eligible. Likewise, even Liverpool's two relegation seasons, in 1903-04 and 1953-54 miss out, by virtue of the fact that they weren't the big beast that they are now at that time. Meanwhile, a club like Santos, who aren't a super club now, finishing 26th in the Campeonato Brasileiro in 1975, immediately after Pelé first retired, when they undoubtedly were a super club, would actually be a more fitting inclusion. I am focusing solely upon league campaigns, and also, I'm excluding any seasons in which teams were relegated or incurred enormous points deductions owing to incidents and scandals off the pitch, like Juventus, who were relegated despite amassing more points than anyone else, in light of the Calciopoli scandal in the 2005-06 season, or Marseille, who were relegated despite finishing second in Ligue 1 owing to a match-fixing scandal in the 1993-94 season. Hopefully that all makes sense, and there will be lots of honourable mentions towards the end because I found this really interesting to write and research, so I want to tell you about some of the seasons that, for one reason or another, didn't quite make my 7. Without further ado though, who had several bitterly disappointing seasons after being declared as super prospects, but he will always be number one in our hearts, won't he? In celebration of Manchester United and Tottenham being total dog dirt this season, here are some of the worst seasons that bona fide super clubs have ever had. 7th, Manchester United, 1973-74. The 2024-25 season has been a rotten one for Manchester United, but it is not their worst. Described by their own manager as, quote, the worst team maybe in the history of Manchester United, this Manchester United team is indeed terrible. They have won 10 and lost 17 of their 36 league games so far this season, and they've only scored 7 goals more than relegated Ipswich Town, who've only won 22 points this season. In fact, Man United have lost 3 more league games this season, and the season hasn't even finished yet, than they did in Sir Alex Ferguson's last 3 seasons in charge of the club combined. Crystal Palace were relegated in the inaugural 1992-93 Premier League season, with 10 points more than Manchester United have amassed this season. All with the 6th highest wage bill, the 4th highest revenue, and the highest transfer expenditure of any club in world football since Sir Alex Ferguson retired. It is pretty incredible. Nonetheless, this probably isn't the worst Manchester United team of all time. Don't be so hard on yourself, Ruben. Relegated 5 times, 4 of those came during the pre-war era, in which Manchester United were still a very big and well-supported club, but not yet the totemic behemoths that they would go on to become. When the club last tasted relegation in the mid-1970s, however, they were a juggernaut, about whom few thought such a fate would ever be possible. Just 2 seasons after Sir Matt Busby's second stint at the club came to an end, 1 season after Bobby Charlton and Dennis Law had departed, and with George Best still around, Manchester United won just 10 games all season, finishing second from bottom in the First Division, and suffering relegation. That is the same number of league games as the club has won this season, but in the era of 22 teams in England's top flight, and just 2 points for a win, it saw them amass a paltry 32 points, missing out on safety by 5 points. Both English and European champions within the preceding decade, Busby left behind arguably an even greater void than Sir Alex, and an even more ageing crop of superstars. Manager Tommy Docherty looked to refresh the club's ageing squad, as Charlton and Law departed and Best struggled with a lack of focus, a loss of form, and alcoholism, but where there was a constant stream of booze available for Best, the goals dried up for United. Just 38 goals in 42 games was the second worst record in the division, and the club's worst of all time. After being let go by Docherty, Law joined cross-city rivals Man City, where legend has it that he relegated his former club with his last kick in professional football, scoring a brilliant backheel goal against them. Except, it is just that. Legend. In actual fact, the Red Devils would have been relegated that afternoon regardless, with 1 game still to go, owing to Birmingham City beating Norwich, making it impossible for Man United to catch them. It was a stunning moment in the history of English football, but the Red Devils bounced back immediately, winning the Second Division title the following season, finishing 3rd and reaching an FA Cup final the season after that, and lifting the FA Cup in 76-77. 6th, Bayern Munich, 1977-78. Finishing 2nd at Bayern Munich constitutes a crisis, 3rd is a catastrophe, and 4th is near enough grounds for a national inquiry. Just imagine the level of inquest and outrage then, when the club finished 12th. That's why, despite not quite getting relegated, Bayern's 1977-78 season is still a fitting inclusion in this 7. Bayern have been relegated, incidentally, only once, in the 1954-55 season, when they fell from the Oberliga Süd down to the 2nd Oberliga Süd for a single season, but that came at a time when Bayern had only ever won 1 German championship, which came during the pre-war era, and they weren't even the best club in Bavaria. By the 1977-78 season, by contrast, Bayern had won 4 Bundesliga titles in the last 9 seasons, and 3 European Cups in the last 4. Not dissimilar to Manchester United just a few years earlier in some respects, Bayern had just lost their greatest player of all time, Franz Beckenbauer, to the New York Cosmos. Club legend Uli Hoeneß was on the verge of retiring and went out on loan to Nuremberg, and Gerd Müller, Hans-Georg Schwarzenbeck, and Sepp Maier were all in their 30s, approaching retirement. Nonetheless, even in his last full season in Bavaria, Müller was still the joint highest scorer in the Bundesliga, tied with his namesake Dieter Müller, no relation at Cologne, scoring 24 goals in 33 games in the league, and 32 in 44 in all competitions. Alongside Müller, Bayern also had Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, a West German and Bayern legend who was just 22 at the time, and would go on to win 2 Ballon d'Ors. Bayern's front 2, therefore, were both either current or future Ballon d'Or winners. That makes it all the more extraordinary that Bayern endured their worst ever Bundesliga campaign, finishing 12th, just 4 places above the relegation zone, having lost more games than they won, and with a negative goal difference. Internal tensions, which are basically a permanent feature at Bayern, a loss of confidence and identity as the team looked to rebuild from their golden generation, and instability under the brief management of Hungarian legend Gyula Laurent, all conspired to create a historically dreadful season for Bayern. They bounced back the following season as Karl-Heinz Rummenigge established himself as the team's talisman, finishing 4th, before lifting back-to-back Bundesliga titles and reaching the semi-finals of both the UEFA Cup and the European Cup over the next 2 seasons. Since then, Bayern have only twice finished outside of the top 4 in the Bundesliga, and only once outside of the top 6 in the 1991-92 season, when they suffered another historically abysmal campaign, finishing 10th, in the first season following German reunification. 5th, Real Madrid, 1947-48. Everything is relative. Finishing 11th in La Liga is forgivable at Sevilla, welcome at Alaves, and excellent for Las Palmas. At Real Madrid, however, it is tantamount to the sky falling in, the Bernabeu burning to the ground, and having all of your organs harvested by a flock of feral pigeons. It's not very good, is the point that I'm trying to get at. Members of an elite group of teams never to have been relegated, alongside the likes of Inter Milan, Benfica, and, somewhat unusually, every MLS club, Real Madrid and Barcelona have remained relentlessly competitive throughout the last century of Spanish football. Finishing anywhere outside of the top 3 might as well be relegation as far as the La Liga giants are concerned, but both clubs have had one season which stands out like a sore thumb within their respective histories. In the case of Barcelona, that is their 1941-42 season, which was just the 4th season following the Spanish Civil War and Franco's rise to power. Despite winning the Copa del Rey, or the Copa del Generalissimo as it was then, Barca suffered their lowest ever league finish, finishing 12th in what was then a 14-team league, with only 8 wins to their name all season. That put Barca just 2 points above the automatic relegation zone to the Segunda Division, and inside of the relegation playoffs, where they thrashed Real Murcia 5-1. I think that Real Madrid can go one better though, or one worse, I suppose, if you really think about it. Fresh off the back of winning back-to-back Copa del Rey crowns in the mid-1940s, Real Madrid suffered what is, quite comfortably, their worst ever season in 1947-48. Los Blancos burnt through 3 different managers in a single season, back when some clubs used to have the same coach for about 30 years, during a chaotic transitional phase for the club. Santiago Bernabeu became Real Madrid president in 1943, and set about putting the club on a path towards European domination. That would take time though, starting with a brand new stadium and training ground. This was the season in which Real Madrid moved into the stadium that now bears Bernabeu's name, then known as the Estadio Real Madrid, and it was the club's first wearing numbered shirts, an innovation pioneered by Arsenal. On the pitch, however, the fact that Madrid were in transition was brutally exposed. Following disappointing 4th and 7th place finishes in the previous 2 campaigns, in which Madrid at least won silverware, virtually everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong in 47-48. Los Blancos won just 7 league games all season, which is barely conceivable. They lost 12, scored 41, and conceded 56, giving them a negative 15-goal difference. Heading into the final game of the season, Madrid was still at risk of relegation. As rivals Barcelona romped to the title, Madrid fought a bitter relegation battle up against Barca's Catalan neighbours Sabadell, Don Astea's finest Real Sociedad, and Real Gijon. A 2-1 win on the final day against Gijon's rivals Real Oviedo secured Madrid's survival, but only by 2 points. It is perhaps one of football's great what-ifs, pondering what might have come of Real Madrid president Santiago Bernabeu's project had the club been relegated in 1948, and, as a result, how different the whole of European and indeed world football might have panned out. As it happened, Madrid survived, and Bernabeu's project would be vindicated. They saw out the challenging 40s and were transformed in the 50s by the arrival of a series of superstars, most notably, and most significantly, Alfredo Di Stefano in 53. Madrid won 12 out of the next 16 La Liga titles, having only won 2 in total up to that point, as well as lifting the first 5 European Cup crowns in succession. Bernabeu's blueprint of having semi-autonomous divisions and departments within football clubs spread rapidly throughout the world of football, and Madrid remained the biggest and most successful club in Europe almost 80 years on, from so nearly dropping out of the top flight. Fourth, Corinthians, 2007. It is perhaps debatable as to whether Brazil's giants were still super clubs in global terms by the mid-2000s, but allow me to make the case for Corinthians. Corinthians are the most successful club in the Campeonato Paulista, the state championship for Sao Paulo, which is the largest state in Brazil with 30 titles. They have the third most Brasileiros, Brazil's national championship, tied with Flamengo, and they are also Brazil's second biggest club in terms of both members and average attendances, trailing only Flamengo. In fact, with an estimated fan base of more than 30 million people, based upon polling, Corinthians are one of the best supported clubs in the world. In the 5 seasons prior to 2007, Corinthians have been both Brasileiro winners and runners-up. The 2006 season was a disappointment, as Corinthians slipped to 9th in the Brasileiro, but they still topped their group in the Copa Libertadores, and were only eliminated in the knockout stage by Boca Juniors. Having lost their top scorer Carlos Tevez to West Ham midway through the 2006 season, in a not remotely controversial transfer with zero long-term repercussions, Corinthians fell apart. Throughout the entire 2007 Brasileiro campaign, Corinthians only won 10 games. That was the second fewest in the division, and they also scored the second fewest goals, bettered or worsened only by last-placed América de Natal, one of the worst Brasileiro teams of all time, who now compete in Serie D. Consequently, just 2 years after winning the league title, and for the first time in the history of the club, Corinthians were relegated in 17th. It remains one of, if not the greatest shock in the history of Brazilian football, but Corinthians bounced back in 2008, winning the Serie B title and reaching the final of the Copa do Brasil. Ahead of life back in the top flight, Corinthians brought Brazilian legend Ronaldo back from Europe to Brazil. Ronaldo scored 23 goals the following season, despite numerous problems with injuries and fatigue, as Corinthians finished 10th and won the Copa do Brasil. They were Brasileiro champions again as soon as 2011, and in 2012, they won a long overdue first ever Libertadores crown. Third, Inter Milan, 1993-94. The first team to earn a podium place in this 7, Serie A was the best league in the world during the 1990s, and Inter Milan were, and still are, titans of the Italian game. The previous season, Inter added the 1991 European Golden Shoe winner and Ballon d'Or runner-up Darko Panchev to a squad which already boasted the likes of Walter Zenga, Nicola Berti, Giuseppe Bergomi, Luigi De Agostini, Ruben Sousa, fellow former Ballon d'Or runner-up Toto Schillaci, and future Ballon d'Or winner Matthias Sammer. Consequently, despite the sale of 3 of Inter's German superstars, Andreas Brem, Lothar Matthäus, and Jurgen Klinsmann, the Nerazzurri finished as Serie A runners-up, just 4 points behind their title-winning rivals AC Milan. The expectation, heading into the 1993-94 season, as Inter added Dutch stars Wim Jonk and Dennis Bergkamp to their squad, was that they would mount another title challenge under Osvaldo Bagnoli. That's not quite how things worked out. Inter, who had only once finished outside of the top 3 over the past 5 seasons, came within inches of a stunning and humiliating relegation. Bagnoli was sacked mid-season and replaced by Gianpiero Marini, who only made it until the end of the season himself, as Inter picked up a meagre 11 wins and only 31 points in total. Just one win from the club's last 13 league matches saw them avoid relegation by a solitary point, and, more than 30 years on, Inter remain the only Italian team never to have tasted relegation. What made the 1993-94 season and Inter's near total collapse all the more extraordinary is that, whilst they couldn't buy a win in Serie A, as the likes of Genoa and Atalanta did the double over them, they actually managed to win the UEFA Cup, defeating the likes of Norwich, Dortmund, Cagliari, and SV Casino Salzburg, now Red Bull Salzburg. I know, right? It's crazy. I told you this video was interesting. I can't believe that some of you didn't trust me. Inter returned to the top 6 the following season, but it wasn't until the 2005-06 season that they finally regained the Serie A title, going on to win the next 5 Scudettos in a row. Second, AC Milan, 1981-82. It is a Milan doubleheader in third and second, and whereas Inter avoided relegation by a single point in the 1993-94 season, there would be no such reprieve for their biggest rivals. After winning the Scudetto in the 1978-79 season, Milan were relegated at the end of the 79-80 campaign. That was an enforced relegation though, after the club was found guilty of match fixing at a trial relating to the Tortorero scandal. Milan would actually have finished third in Serie A that season without their conviction, a massive 20 points clear of the drop and only 5 off the title, which is why few were surprised to see them romp to the Serie B title the following season, regaining their top-flight status. This was a Milan team with no lack of talent, including the likes of Mauro Tassotti and a young Franco Baresi, and most people expected them to once again compete at the top end of the Serie A table. In actual fact, Milan were relegated again, this time without any trials or convictions, simply not being very good at football would suffice. 7 wins all season constituted the club's worst ever showing, as they racked up just 25 points. A 5-game unbeaten run at the end of the campaign, including 2 victories, wasn't enough to drag Milan to safety, as Cagliari and Genoa each finished 1 point above them. Milan's bounce back would be instant once again, with an even more emphatic Serie B title, and this time they did consolidate and become competitive again in the top flight of Italian football. The real turnaround came in 1986 though, when notorious deceased sex pest and Italian president Silvio Berlusconi bought and began bankrolling the club. He brought in the likes of Marco van Basten, Ruud Gullit, and Carlo Ancelotti in his second season at the helm, which saw Milan lift their first Serie A title since the 70s, with successive European Cup wins to follow under the extraordinary management of Arrigo Sacchi. Fun fact, fullback Sergio Battistini, who won 4 caps for Italy, featured in both AC Milan's disastrous 1981-82 campaign, in which the club was relegated, and Inter Milan's atrocious 1993-94 campaign, over a decade later, in which they were almost relegated for the first and only time, making him a part of 2 of the worst seasons that super clubs have ever had. He also failed to win the Serie A title with either of them. The bloke is cursed, alright? 0. Honourable mentions. Okay, before we come to top spot, I alluded to some honourable or dishonourable mentions in the introduction, as there are some dreadful seasons that just missed out on my 7, but that it felt remiss of me not to mention. Arsenal finished bottom of the First Division and were relegated in the 1912-13 season, but weren't yet a super club without a top flight or FA Cup title to their name, with successive rotten 1974-75 and 1975-76 seasons, in which they finished 16th and 17th, 4 and 6 points above the relegation zone, only 4 years after winning a League and Cup double, being much stronger candidates. Manchester United's 1893-94, 1921-22, 1930-31, and 1936-37 relegations all came before they were a true super club, so missed out, but both their 1962-63 season, in which they finished 19th, and of course, this season, an honourable or dishonourable mentions, with Chelsea's 1961-62, 1974-75, 1978-79 and 1987-88 seasons, all 4 of which saw them relegated, rounding off the English mentions, but I would argue that Chelsea weren't a solidly established super club by the criteria of this video at any stage prior to the Roman Abramovich era. Elsewhere, Portugal's Big 3, who form the top 3 in the Primeira Liga almost every season, and who have won all but 2 Primeira Liga titles in the entire history of the Portuguese game, have had 1 terrible season each. Benfica finished 6th in the 2000-2001 season, which is absolutely freakish for them, managed by Jose Mourinho during the second half of the season. Lisbon rival Sporting went 1 worse as recently as the 2012-13 season, when they finished 7th, and most notably and most terribly of all, Porto finished 9th in the 1969-70 season, just 5 points above the relegation zone, having only won 8 games all season. For one of Portugal's big three, it really takes some doing to win that few games and points, and to finish that far down the table. Feyenoord, meanwhile, who are mainstays among the big three in the Netherlands, finished 11th, also only 5 points above the drop, during a calamitous 1989-90 season. Celtic finished 12th, only avoiding relegation by 4 points, during a diabolical 1947-48 season, which really is astonishing by post-war Big Two in Scotland standards. Their old firm rivals Rangers failed to win promotion, finishing third, in the second-tier Scottish Championship on their climb back up through the Scottish Football League pyramid in the 2014-15 season. Borussia Dortmund were relegated in the 1971-72 season, within a decade of winning the Bundesliga, the DFB Pokal, and the European Cup Winners' Cup, spending the next 4 years outside of the top flight. And over in South America, whilst Argentine juggernauts Boca Juniors have never been relegated, they went from winning the Argentine Primera División in 1924 to finishing 20th out of 23 teams in 1925, albeit that was primarily because they went on a European tour, which meant that they only played 7 league games all season. Meanwhile, they only avoided relegation by 1 point in the 1949 season, while playing all of their games. And 3-time Libertadores winners Palmeiras, who have won the Brasileiro more times than any other club, have had 2 notable dog-turd seasons as a super club, namely in 2002, when the club lost a key sponsorship deal and was relegated for the first time in their history, and in 2012, when Palmeiras won the Copa do Brasil undefeated, but lost a whopping 22 out of their 38 league games, qualifying for the Copa Libertadores, but suffering a second ever relegation in the same season. Bloody hell, that was a long sentence, wasn't it? And last but not least, the honourable mention that probably came closest to featuring, in the season that Johan Cruyff made his professional debut, Dutch giants Ajax suffered what was, by far their worst ever Eredivisie campaign, finishing 13th, and only avoiding what would have been perhaps the most shocking relegation in all of football history by 3 points. Thankfully, the young lad Cruyff turned out to be pretty decent, and Ajax won 3 successive Eredivisie titles over the next 3 seasons, followed by 3 successive European Cups during the 1970s. Spurs and Man United fans will be hoping for similar rebounds from their current dreadful campaigns, though sadly, I'm not sure that either of them have anyone quite of the calibre of Cruyff. My sincere apologies to Victor Lindelof and Destiny Udogie there, it is nothing personal. First, River Plate, 2008-09. River Plate are one of the biggest clubs in world football by almost any metric. They rank first in the all-time Argentine Primera División table, with the most wins and the most games played. They also rank first in the all-time Copa Libertadores table, with the most wins and, again, the most games played. And they have the highest average attendance, at just shy of 85,000, in the entirety of world football. Record 38-time Primera División title winners and 4-time Libertadores winners, River contest a fierce derby known as the Super Clásico against Boca Juniors, and for more than 100 years of their existence, neither club had ever been relegated. That all changed in 2011 when, in undoubtedly the most shocking non-enforced relegation in the history of the sport, River finished 17th inside of the relegation playoff places. Even then, few people thought that they would actually go down, but over 2 legs, River lost 3-1 against Belgrano, who finished 4th in the Primera B Nacional that season. You might be wondering, why doesn't River's 2010-11 season therefore take top spot in this 7? Which is a good question, and it very well could have done. But the relegation places in the Argentine Primera División are formulated based upon the average number of points won, total points divided by games played, over the last 3 seasons, not on a season-by-season basis. Don't ask. Argentine football doesn't make any sense. It is among the most dysfunctional and confusing leagues and domestic football environments on the planet, as I recently covered in a feature-length video, but that is the way that it, for want of a better word, works. The consequences of this system, often considered to be an intended one, is that it makes it much more difficult for any of the big boys to get relegated, let alone River or Boca. A single dreadful campaign simply won't suffice. You have to be sufficiently terrible for 3 straight seasons in order to lose your top flight status, and even then, you have the possible reprieve of the playoffs. The 2008-09 season, the first of the three taken into account which saw River relegated, features in top spot because it was the most disastrous and the one which set the club on an inconceivable path towards relegation. Having won the title the previous season, which was River's 35th title, the club finished dead last, 20th out of 20 teams, during the Apertura phase the following season, only winning 2 games and amassing a humiliating 14 points, and even during the Clausura phase, they still only won 1 more game than they lost. The 2009-10 season, in which River finished 14th and 13th in each of the 2 league phases, wasn't much of an improvement, and could also have featured, meaning that even a significant upturn in form during the season that River were actually relegated, they finished 4th and 9th in the 2010-11 season, wasn't enough to steer them away from danger, as they finished inside of the relegation playoffs, where they suffered that shock defeat against Belgrano. River's sudden collapse came as the result of a cascade of crises, both on and off the pitch. Despite winning the league, manager Diego Simeone resigned after River were knocked out of the 2008 Copa Sudamericana quarterfinals by Mexican side Chivas. Club president Jose Maria Reguila resigned in December 2009, leaving behind debts of $75 million. He was succeeded as president by Simeone's predecessor as manager, Argentina and River legend Daniel Passarella, as prized assets like Juan Pablo Carrizo and Radamel Falcao were sold, certainly in the latter's case, for cut price fees. Following relegation, River signed David Trezeguet and secured an immediate return to the top flight, and in the 2013-14 season, they reclaimed the Primera División title. Well, that is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course make sure that you are subscribed, and have notifications turned on both for this channel, HITC Sevens, and my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on social media, Instagram, X, that type of thing, typically via the username at HITC Sevens, and you can now become a channel member on the Alfie Potsama YouTube channel, or via buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potsama. All of the links to all of those things that I just mentioned should be down in the video description below, should you be interested. But more importantly, look after yourselves until next time, and I hope you all have a brilliant day. Cheers.